Hey, what's going on, everybody? Just making a quick update video. I had something kind of odd happen, so I wanted to make a video to show about it. Those of you that have watched any of the previous videos know this is my '05 SRT4. I've had it for 8 months or so. In that 8 months, I've rebuilt a bunch of stuff. When I got it, I knew it was going to be a total rebuild, so it's not really a surprise or an issue. But in that 8 months, rebuilt the engine, rebuilt the transmission, completely redid the suspension. And in my last video, I talked about how the next thing was going to either be to do the brakes all the way around or fix the front end issues, which is front core support, radiator, fans, bumper, hood. Stuff's all out of whack up front because of two probably low speed impacts, one on each side, one on the passenger side and one on the driver's side, so it makes everything sit uneven. So that was probably going to be the next thing, but because I rebuilt the engine, transmission, suspension, the hood's just up. It's not closed down all the way because I was just messing with it. So the hood does normally sit lower than that. But so anyway, I do drive it around. It is a fun car to play with. So even though I am doing all this work to it, I still drive it around, play with it, probably once every other week or something. But when I went to start the car the other day, it wouldn't start. It was just out of nowhere, random, just wouldn't start. And I said, okay, well, maybe it's a starter, maybe it's a, lock cylinder or something. So to explain what was going on, you could go in the car, put the key in the ignition, and you would go one click just like normal. Gauges come on, radio comes on, just like normal. You would go to start the car, actually turn the key to turn it over, and nothing would happen. Starter wouldn't turn. The only thing that would happen would be like the air to fuel ratio gauge. On these cars, when you put the air to fuel ratio gauge in it, when you go to start it, when you actually turn the key to get it to crank, to get the starter to turn, the air to fuel ratio gauge cuts off for a split second and then comes back 3 dashes or whatever the air to fuel ratio is, and that's what it would do. So it was almost as if the key was going far enough to tell the air to fuel ratio gauge, hey, something's trying to be started, but not quite far enough to actually engage the starter and start the car. And it was weird. Obviously, the first thing I was thinking was, okay, it's a bad starter. It's got 140 some thousand miles on it. Starter probably went bad. So I went, tested the starter with a voltmeter. I was getting 12 volts at the positive lead of the starter, but then almost no volts at the negative side of the starter, which was kind of indicative of a bad starter. So I said, okay, well, I did some research, found out that apparently on these cars, the lock cylinder, which is where you actually stick the key inside, the lock cylinder is pretty beefy and they usually don't break. But one part that does break is these ignition switch actuator pins. And so I took everything apart inside, took the lock cylinder out, took this ignition switch actuator pin out, and sure enough, this was broken. So we can see here, this piece was broken off. These are the pieces that were inside. And just this little broken piece, so the lock cylinder goes into here. The lock cylinder is what you put your key in. So you put the key in the lock cylinder engages with this, and that's what you turn and actually gets it to start. The other end of this is the electronic part of the ignition switch. So that's what tells the starter to, send power, to turn the flywheel. So, and this is just the outside housing of this piece. But it was just crazy that out of nowhere, not only did the piece break, and it wasn't a starter, it was just this. I replaced this ignition. It's called an ignition switch actuator pin. And I replaced this pin, car started right up, like there was no issue. But it was just crazy to think that just this little piece, this little broken piece that would sit like right there, kind of like that, if I had an extra hand. But regardless, You know, something like, yeah, this is obviously backwards. It went like, kind of like that, really. But either way, just that little piece shut the whole car down. You know, that just that one broken piece was able to make it so that the entire car wouldn't start, wouldn't do anything. I guess worst case scenario, now this happened to me at home, it wasn't a big deal. But if that had happened to you while you were out somewhere, the only way to start the car would be to roll, you know, push it, get it going fast enough, and then drop the clutch in first gear and get it to start. But I mean, I guess if you had a couple guys, you could push the car and get it going fast enough to be able to start it. But short of that, you'd be pretty much stuck. And when I was reading up on Google about these issues, apparently a couple guys have had the issue where it happened to them while they weren't home. They had to have the car towed back, take it apart to find out that it was this ignition switch actuator pin. So like I said, just wanted to give an update on what was going on. I thought it was crazy that just that little piece was able to shut the whole car down, for one. For two, that it wasn't a starter at all. It was just this little actuator pin. It was like 50 some, like $57, $58, something like that at AutoZone. I was surprised that my local parts store did have one in stock. So I was able to just go grab it from the store, throw this one in, and you know, be done with it, have the car start right back up. So unfortunately, in the last video I said that my next video would be either that front end work that I was doing or the brakes. Obviously this video isn't about that because I had to deal with this before I could go on to something else. But at least now it's done, and if you guys in the future have any issues like that on your SRT4 or just a regular Dodge Neon or PT Cruiser, they're all pretty similar. So the only telltale sign that it was something in this ignition switch, not the starter, was the fact that when I would turn the key, it was noticeable that the key wasn't going as far as it should when you tried to start it, if that makes any sense. It just didn't go as far. Other guys that I've heard about that had these issues say something like the key would just rotate all the way around, it wouldn't grab anything. Other guys say it would turn, but then you know, not turn backwards, or turn and get stuck in a position or something like that. I didn't have any of those symptoms. Mine was just the fact that it would go all the way to start, just not quite far enough. So, but again, just that little bit was able to shut the whole thing down. So my next video will be the stuff that I actually intended to do. I do have a fender roller here, so I am gonna go ahead and roll the fenders because it has been lowered a little bit. I did drop it down a couple inches, not low enough to really rub, but I do want to roll those fenders, pull them out a little bit, probably be able to run some wider tires on the front, but we'll see when we get to the exterior. I still got to do all the front end issues, the brakes, the interior with the roll cage, the ACR seats with the harness, and I still have a bunch of stuff to do. So I'll keep you guys posted. If you have any, you know, comments, this happened on your car, or you run into this issue, at least now you know what another thing could be if it has that telltale sign that the key just doesn't feel right or something's going on there. I'd be curious to know how many of you guys have this issue. I know there's not a lot of SRT4s left anyway, and most of them that are out there do have higher mileage, so maybe this is a more frequent occurrence than I think it is. But either way, I appreciate everybody watching. Thank you all for your time, and we'll see you on the next video.